Hello and welcome back to Prism and Company. My name is Colin, and on the docket today, I am going through the Major Arcana of the OceanDry Tarot. Now, this is the tarot deck that I made, and I made a lot of changes to the majors specifically. I reordered them. They are very, very different and non-traditional. If you're curious about, say, things like the new numbering system or the color schemes throughout, I have videos and I will leave those in the description box below. But what I want to talk about this time is reading these cards. A lot of them have stayed kind of the same, but there's this whole extra narrative that is laid on top that gives them a little more flavor. Or not more flavor, they already have so much flavor, but a different flavor. Almost like a different cuisine, if you will. So I'm going to be going through card by card and talking about them, and I really, really hope you enjoy. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below on any cards that you found surprising or not changed very much, just whatever you think. I would love to have these kind of discussions below. It's like my favorite part of doing this, to be totally honest. Okay, enough gabbing. Let's get going. A little bit of prerequisite watching, I would say, to this video is the story of the Major Arcana. I'm going to reference that up, left, down, and right, as they say, to no one, from no one, never. But that narrative is integral to the way that I read these. So if you haven't seen it, super highly recommend it. Check it out in the card up top here. And let's get going. This is our extra card in the deck. I don't know why I said R, it's mine. This is OceanDry, card number 217. I am completely obsessed with the number 217. That is a discussion for a different day, but just know for now, that is why I included it on the card. And I almost don't intend for this card to be used in the deck. To me, this image wraps up everything we're about to talk about. And this is just like the cheat sheet reminder card. You know, if you ever forget exactly what OceanDry is all about, take a look at this. And it'll kind of be a reminder once we kind of go through everything. Now, the story here, the spoiler here, is that our hero wakes up in the desert, but then through learning and time realizes that it's not the desert, but actually the sandy bottom of the ocean. So this is the ocean that seems dry. That's why we're looking at the word ocean dry. The sun and the moon also have a lot to play with this, the conscious versus the subconscious. Now, the other narrative that's at work here, the kind of more mundane narrative, is the idea of how we learn, or I suppose specifically how I learn. And even more specifically, how I learned tarot. The journey of me learning tarot is chronicled in the OceanDry story, and I think it has bigger implications, at least for my personal learning style. This is heavily influenced from the author H.P. Lovecraft. I think his work is a little bit apocalyptic for my taste, but so cool. If you're not familiar, the very, very baseline idea is that learning can be dangerous because it opens our mind to things that we can't yet perceive, and that will probably like be too much or overwhelm us or, you know, make us go crazy in his books. But that idea of kind of reaching a plateau of knowledge, learning something that you can't unlearn and seeing something in a new way, in a bigger way, is definitely what we're looking at here. And each card correlates to a step of that process. Let's begin with card number 0. This is a 0, the Sun. Now, for me, reading this card normally, and I should say for all of these cards, is going to be very much filtered through the lens of the Thoth tarot deck. That is the deck that I learned with. It has colored my entire perception of what tarot is. So for better or for worse, that is just true. In the Thoth, the sun is very much about yourself, your consciousness. It is you. You are standing, you know, naked in the desert in front of the sun, and, you know, you can see all can be seen. It's very empowering in some ways. It's very scary in some ways. But overall, Crowley calls this one of the best cards in the deck. And I think selfhood and realizing who you are was a really, really big value for him. In fact, I know it was, because he says it all the time. In this deck, this is very much about stumbling upon a new idea. So if we're talking about the journey of learning, you have to find out about something first. So in our narrative, we're waking up in the pit of like an abandoned ruin. We're looking up through floorboards and seeing what we think initially is the moon. There's some sun poking through a hole or a knot in the wood. And then our eyes kind of adjust, and then we realize it's the desert. So this is our first our first threshold already. We have to reach a threshold first, because when you learn about a new topic, immediately you can't unknow about the topic. This is our first little step into things that we cannot unknow. We don't yet know anything about it. We're still confused about where we are, what's happening, why we're here. We won't figure out that last one for a long time. But this is that initial step of just learning. So reading this card then would be still very much selfhood. We identify that we are ourselves, but we are in this new place. It's also 0, so it's very much beginnings and kind of like shining light on something new. So we are the sun almost in this case. We are illuminating something, although we don't necessarily know all the implications of that. Let's take a look at card number 1. The Emperor. At this point in our story, we are emerging from the ruins, or the basement, I should say, into the ruins and kind of exploring around. Now, there is a tiered way that I look at these cards. I will insert the diagram here. So there is bits of rising action, there's bits of falling action, there are peaks and valleys. Each of these tarot cards, or these major cards, correspond to one of these elements. So as you see the story kind of progress, you'll go up and down. This represents mastery, this particular card and cards like it. Now, here we're having kind of like beginner's confidence with learning. We've stepped our toe into the subject, and there is no expert like a novice. So we are feeling great. We know everything. What could possibly go wrong? In the Thoth tradition, the Emperor is very much about something that like holds up something else. It is the king quietly and distantly overseeing. So the Emperor in this case is almost like looking at the person who is being so foolish and naive, because, fast forward to the end of the deck, the star is the card that's paired with this one. It's actually the moon looking down at us, not the sun. It is our higher selves observing our lower selves and just like shaking its head like, no, that's not right. But for now, we are going to embrace that naivete, that knowing, that fool's knowing, I suppose. If you're reading with this card, you can bring in a little bit of that overseeing quality. So reading the Emperor as looking at something else instead of potentially you being the Emperor yourself. Or how I tend to read it is your higher self looking out for your lower self, kind of keeping it in check. Let's take a look at number 2. The Hierophant. Now, I might abandon the normal Thoth interpretations. I don't know. I might sprinkle them in. Who knows? Here, we have come across something that we don't yet understand, but don't even know we don't understand. If you read a textbook, for example, you will stumble across a bit of information that you just like gloss over. You're just like, yeah, sure, insert vocabulary word or keyword here. And it's something you don't even have context to understand yet. So it's very much just seeing a glimpse of the end, but not getting there. Here on the card, we have the image of OceanDry. We have the desert with the sun, we have the waves with the moon, but the person stumbling across it, our hero in this tale, just sees this weird stone with these crazy markings. They have zero context to put it together that they're not in the desert. They are in fact at the bottom of the ocean. So if you pull this card, for me anyway, it's very much about kind of embracing that not knowing quality, like seeking out a teacher or trying to examine what you're looking at closer. It's knowing that you are missing something. There is an element that you are not seeing clearly. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Let's take a look at number 3. Other side. The Fool, number 3. I have worked with these, new numerations and everything for years and years and years now, and it's still weird to say that the Fool is not 0, but c'est la vie. In the story here, we have now stepped out of our relative safety of the ruins and into the desert, and mirages take the sand and turn it into waves. I'm actually going to fast forward here just slightly. You can actually see that the composition is exactly the same on these cards, or the way that it's drawn. The sand here has turned into waves, or vice versa. The waves turn into sand eventually. So, he says as he puts the cards away, this is like the point where a lot of people stop learning. The Fool is someone who remains foolish or ignorant. You hit a plateau of like, you need to kind of take the next step and really dive in and start learning something immense, and you're kind of seeing the size of it for the first time, and you either charge through the mirage and keep going, or you say, nope, I'm done. This is as much as I need to learn, or I have learned as much as I need to. The fool might say, oh, I've already figured this out. Like, there's all this extra information, but it's just going to be reiterating the same thing. So this is a definite choice of sorts. I think much like the Hierophant is looking at information that you need to learn or understand better, the Fool is understanding the action or the choice in that. It is about, choosing to move forward in a situation you do not understand or that you don't know the scope of yet, even though the implications of that might not be what you're expecting. Let's take a look at number 4. The Lovers. Why the big This card is so much to me about feeling separateness. So the Lovers and Temperance are so tightly interwoven for me. And this is so Thothi. They're both referring to two parts of the whole. The Lovers is the separateness. So an example here is marriage. The Lovers is two individual people that are married. Temperance is one unit. You have now become one. You are a married couple. So it is identifying that within a duality, there is always a singularity and the duality. So for here, in our story, we realize the immensity of the desert. We finally get the scope. We've moved past that stage of the Fool where we don't yet know what the scope is, but we understand we have to go into it. And this is like going to the library and seeing that there's like 45 shelves of books that you haven't read yet, and knowing that each one contains new information. Now, obviously, that is not always the case for every topic, but just that initial looking for like how big is the scope, and then that feeling of overwhelmedness. You and that information are still, technically one. You have access to the books. You are there. Depending on your kind of worldview, you could say that your higher self already has that knowledge and is just guiding you towards it. Depends if you are an Akashic record type person or a total strict knowledge person. Either way, this is recognizing the separateness of you from the information. And eventually we will get to the point where we consolidate all the information into us. Oh, and won't that be a lovely time indeed? So when you're reading this card, it is about that immensity. It is about that separation. Honestly, even though this is one of the most distinct cards in the deck from, say, a traditional deck, I read this very much like I do the normal Lovers card because it's just like a lovely little perfect package for me. Let's take a look at number 5. The Priestess. Now, fun fact, I just like this a lot. The Priestess is normally number 2 and the Hierophant is normally number 5. I did not intend for this to happen, but they have reversed in this deck, which I think is pretty cool. Now, in the same way that the High Priestess and the Hierophant, I personally think are very related in a normal tarot deck, they are here too. The Hierophant is very much about seeing this knowledge and not understanding it. The Priestess is about experiencing that knowledge and not understanding it. There is, moments of uncanny insight that we have as we're learning, where we might say something too wise beyond what we know, or something suddenly kind of clicks into place and we don't exactly know where it came from or how we got it. Just the information bubbles to the surface and we happen to catch it. That kind of mysteriousness is what I see in the Priestess. Now in our story, a shell has fallen onto the desert sand. Now that is our higher self, the moon, dropping a shell to try and tell our lower self, hey, it's the ocean, it's not the desert. And they're dropping the most obvious thing they could think of, which is sea life. Of course, our lower self does not get it at this point. Here in this bottom, we have a symbol of earth, and then there's like a small scratching of a line. So it's the symbol of water with a small scratching of the line, because we think that it's earth, but we're actually trying to be like, no, it's a beacon, it's water, it's water, it's water. I'm getting too excited and just shouting at you now. When you're reading this card, it's very much about that kind of experiential mystery, either opening yourself up to the opportunity to experience something like that, or investigating strange experiences that felt divined or somehow, imbued from a higher place. You can kind of insert whatever your belief system is there. For me, it's always going to be the higher self shouting as loud as possible at the lower self, and us not knowing the language yet of how to speak with that, but trying really, really hard to. Let's take a look at number 6. The Chariot. This one is a grind, literally. In our image here, we can see the passage of time. We see night to day. And we have the pillar of night and the pillar of day that are nice and whole, but it is in the transition between those. It is in the passage of time that wear and tear occurs. This is all about continuing to learn. Learning blows sometimes. Like, as much as it is exciting and cool, we all know we get to a chapter in a book or a lesson or whatever, and it's just a slog. Some days you do not feel like continuing forward, excuse me. And this so represents that, because that is sacred space right there. That is doing the work and trudging through the desert. The Chariot so much to me is about keeping something sacred and moving through a difficult terrain with it, because knowledge is so sacred, this thing that we're learning. And in the story, you're taking the shell with you. You're taking these odd experiences, these little flashes of insight or brilliance with you. And again, not understanding what they are, but knowing that they're important. So that is, again, how I read this. I don't know why I said again. I haven't told you yet. That is how I read this. Taking what you have, what's important, and moving with it, even though the journey will be difficult and the terrain will be hard. I don't read the Chariot as moving fast. I often read it as moving trudgingly slow. Let's take a look at number 7. The Magician, or as one of my best friends says, the Magish. Hashtag Tom Benjamin. Go check him out on YouTube. This card is another one of those peaks in the story where we really feel confident. So the Emperor was our last one. We have come a long way since the Emperor. Now we're at the Magician. And here you can see we're starting to find stuff in the desert and gather it. And this is very much that point where you're kind of like taking stock and inventory. You've actually learned something at this point. And this is another dangerous step, because confidence can be a real killer. You know enough to be dangerous. You're at the maybe like apprentice level, and you're feeling like, okay, I can actually do the thing that I'm trying to learn, or understand the thing that I'm trying to learn. And sure, there's probably some more. That right there, that thought is like the way that this can really spiral down negative, is like, I could probably stop here. Like, I'm feeling really good. I'm feeling very proficient and confident. And then the positive version of this is, I'm going to take all of this and then charge forward. I now have resources and materials that I can use in the desert to make the journey faster and quicker. So it's like this choice of stopping or continuing. And really, it's all about, how do you use the stuff that you have? How do you kind of channel that information that you've already learned? Do you hoard it and use it? Or do you, reinvest in yourself, in your idea, and continue forward? And that's, partially how I read this. I also read the Magician very much as like conduit of the higher self to the lower self. And you can just sort of superimpose that idea over what I just said. This circle here is the exact same shape as, let me grab it, the moon. Nope, here we go. The sun. The sun and the moon. You can see it's the same compositional space. The sun is where we came from. The moon is ultimately where we're going. And this is the moon, your higher self, begging you to take this and move forward with it. I hope this is making sense, by the way. If it's not, sorry, I'll make another video. But let's move on to number 8. Fortune. And I gotta say, I really like how this card turned out. I was iffy on it for a while, but I think it really sings. It maintains a lot of the abstract quality that I really wanted in the deck, while still being pretty specific with the little bits of shell. Now in our story, this is the shell breaking. We're feeling so confident that we use it as a tool, and it shatters and cuts something. The shell shatters as it cuts something. And then immediately you see that there were rocks right next to it that you could have used. So it's good luck, bad luck. You also find a cave in the story, which we'll see next in Strength. Again, check out that narrative video if you haven't. But it's that kind of up and down quality, that good and bad. It's, taking the trudge of the Chariot, which is still happening all this way. Excuse me, I'm so burpy tonight. And continuing your way on. Because, you kind of accumulate the Major Arcana as you go. It's not like that stuff stays. But here, you kind of reach a point where the mysteries are revealed. Like we had those mysteries in the Priestess, And you lose those at some point. You kind of figure them out or you learn them. Like we are continuing to learn and grow. And there's something kind of exciting and cool about having a mystery. And then when you learn it, it can be a real disappointment. It can be very disheartening to want to continue because it's like, oh, well, now I just know this. But on the flip side of that, as we start to learn, more and more avenues open up. And that's really going to be the theme of this whole deck is the more you know, the less you know. And it's kind of a paradoxical idea, but it is perfectly, relevant to present here in Fortune because you go up and you go down. As you learn about a new topic, you then learn about subtopics or branches or all these things. And that's all stuff you don't know. And then you have to start the process over again at the beginning with all of those. And then it just spirals out and out and out and out, and everything is connected. It is this giant blossoming flower that is so overwhelming and completely crippling. But we've just tasted it here. We have not yet fallen into the depths of despair. Let's take a look at number 9. Strength. Here we are in that cave. We have just broken our shell and the sun is setting. It's that real overwhelming moment. Now, we've had this kind of moment before, the Fool, where we sort of like trudging through and we had to decide like, okay, are we going to go into what we don't know? Are we going to, back out? Here we know the score. We have seen Fortune. We now see the breadth of what we're working with. Like we can actually see the starts of these things moving and going in different ways. And that is a super intimidating place to be because now you are informed and aware. You are not making this decision from a place of ignorance, but from a place of knowledge. And you are going to, continue on with this journey or not. You're going to die in the cave or you're going to go out and kind of fight your way through. And as you can probably guess, we're choosing to fight our way through because why not? But strength, as so many cards in the tarot are, is that kind of crux and choice and drawing from that inner strength to keep you moving through chariot moments, to keep you moving through disappointing fortune moments, to, continue the grind and continue going through the desert. You're realizing that, maybe you're not quite as smart. Actually, you're not nearly as smart as you were in The Magician. And you need to, kind of have that beginner's mind again and start over. And it's that strength to again go from the beginning. We're now branching out into subcategories. So you're realizing that it's not really a journey that's linear, it's a cycle. It's always going to start and start and start and start because you're always learning something new. There will always be something new to learn. It's much like the sun kind of going up and down and up and down. And here we can see those rotations of the sun as they kind of move throughout the year. Let's take a look at 10. I feel like this one was a mess. Sorry. I'll stop apologizing, but I just want I want to express this so like perfectly to you because it's so exciting to me and hopefully it's still being clear. Here we have the Hermit. The Hermit is trudging up this sand dune and getting kind of sick from the plants that you were eating in the cave. You were kind of like nomming down on the plants. And it's this idea of kind of like glut from the information, like it starts to weigh down on you. You're feeling that first experience of the heaviness because now you know like, okay, I need to know all this stuff. I have so much more to learn. It's tiresome. I get the image of somebody like in a library surrounded by books. It's that very like internal closed off feeling. Also, side note to that, it's also the feeling or the plateau that you're reaching of knowing more than other people because now you officially have you've made it to strength and you've decided, yes, to keep pushing. You're past the point where like the common person would know knowledge about this thing. You have entered a different tier. And that can be really isolating too, knowing things that other people don't, because now you don't have people to talk about it with. And obviously that's not totally true, but your pool has significantly diminished. I think we've all probably experienced this with stuff that we're super duper passionate about. People can appreciate it and love it and be excited about it, but if you want to engage in a discussion with them, you're going to hit a wall really, really fast. And that wall is very, very lonely. And to seek respite from that, to be re-inspired, you have to look inward at that flame and kind of get reignited. Here, visually, we can see our protagonist, our hero, looking directly at the moon, looking directly at their higher self. They are finally understanding that the higher self is a thing, that, you know, the teaching is happening from within and from without, and they're looking at it, but again, it's so far, it's so distant, they have no concept of what it is. And the fever from this sickness of the plants is about to take over, so let's take a look at what happens in number 11. Jugement, or should I say judgment, as the common folk say. Now, in our story here, we are seeing a vision of the ocean. It's a fever dream, essentially. The sun blaring gloriously like a siren. And this kind of calls back to the Fool in a way, because in the Fool, we saw the, let me grab the Fool I'm talking. We saw the ocean, but it was just a mirage. And, you know, it kind of like passed and went away. Here we're seeing more of the context of the ocean. We're seeing it swell with this giant skyline and the sun blaring. And this is the point where, you know, we've kind of made that upcycle on the fortune card. We've seen what needs to be learned and have to kind of start again from that beginning perspective. Strength has told us, yes, we're going to go. We have looked inward to find inspiration for it. And now pieces start coming together. And we don't know what the whole is yet, but, you know, eventually you get to this place when you're learning where just like all the puzzle pieces start to like snap into place. And you're like, wait, all these disparate ideas, like this whole thought concept, like actually clicks into this thought concept. And you begin to push and pull, and ideas begin to percolate and form, and it's really exciting. This is a very much like Six of Wands kind of card to me, or not Six of Wands, Six of Swords kind of card, that like flash of brilliance, but the really big cosmic almost version of this. And again, you still don't know exactly what this is, but it is the moment of like clicking and coming together. This is the scene in the detective movie when they're like putting all the clues together, but they don't solve the crime. And everybody freaking loves that scene because it's so good. I know I sure do. Here, we are, of course, moving on to the next, but if we're reading this card, I'm very much reading it as that kind of new threshold. And I think threshold's like the perfect word. Crowley calls this card the Aeon, and it's about moving from one paradigm to another. You know, the world moving into a new Aeon doesn't look different. The world itself doesn't change, but there's something behind the scenes, something fundamental that has shifted. And it is those, you know, that foundation of your thought, those pieces finally clicking together, that shifts your foundation in the same way. Cool, let's take a look at 12. Justice. Now, this is the point where my, like, I'm having a real justice moment as I'm talking about justice. Actually, let me dive in from the story aspect. This is the conscious mind trying desperately to tell us it's the desert, and our subconscious mind trying desperately to tell us it's the ocean, and that adjustment, that like fighting to maintain what you thought you knew, or kind of like reality. Now, this is where things take a little more of a metaphysical turn than I am typically used to. I'm very pragmatic. I am very utilitarian mostly. I am so interested by the occult and the magical and all those things, but my brain will tell me very much it's not real. And I do believe that in many ways, but there is something magical about the world, and you can kind of treat that however you like, but I think it's hard to deny that there isn't something extraordinary that can happen. And you know, whatever that is for you, it is for you. But for me, it so happens with learning, and especially learning about something like tarot, because again, like, this is my specific tarot journey that I'm learning here, although I think it applies to knowledge in many ways too. But like, all of these puzzle pieces have started fitting together in judgment, and there's almost part of our brain that doesn't want it all to click together, or it's clicking together in a way we didn't expect. That is probably the more accurate version of that. And this is the brain fighting to be like, no, I knew what this was. I had a grip on this. And even though you're understanding more, you're resistant to it because of how different it is, or how serendipitous or magical it might feel. And there's a couple more cards in here before you really kind of get to the craziness. But this is a real crux moment of just like your brain needing to kind of find balance again. And that's so much how I read this card. I read it honestly a little bit more mundane than that, but just trying to pull things back to center, the act of adjustment and kind of pulling things back down to earth. If you want to get a little more esoteric about it, this would be the fight of your conscious and your subconscious in something that has happened that is a little bit more magical than you might expect or want to believe. Let's take a look at 13, because I cannot wait to get to 15. I'm actually going to take a look at two cards here, the Empress and Death. Let me grab these side by side, because this is really a crux point that happens, and they kind of happen simultaneously and maybe even neither. So it just depends where you're at. So we've just had this moment of justice where our brain is fighting to keep us back in like reality land and not let us go like spinning off into total craziness. And we can do that. We can, at the story here, we found the ship in the desert. The ship that was in the vision of judgment is actually real. And it is the final biggest piece of the puzzle that we are on the bottom of the ocean. It's like your higher self shaking you. And the Empress is keeping yourself in reality land, knowing this information, keeping it kind of in the way that you want it to be, not fully diving in and letting yourself go like crazy expansive with it. And Death is allowing yourself to fully fall in. Now, this is the point in our story, especially once we get to the Tower, which is next, where things go off the rails, and admittedly so. I think this is the learning journey that most people experience and that most mundane topics cap off at. There is not a lot of things that'll take us beyond this unless you are genius level into something. Because you learn, you kind of get to that master stage and you feel comfortable there. You feel safe. You have all of your tools just like from the magician, but now you're in a boat protected from the sun. You have found your shelter and your space. Or you allow that idea to die and fully embrace the idea of everything is connected, and how can you take this knowledge you now know and apply it to literally everything else. And that's where things completely break down and break loose. We have hit all of these little thresholds along the way. This is a big one. This is one where there is 0, 0, 0 going back from this point. Let's take a look at the Tower, and I will continue to kind of talk about these moments as we go. The Tower. Now I'm realizing I didn't really talk about how I read these cards, the Empress and Death. This, I'll just touch on them briefly because I probably won't circle back around to them. Empress is a womb-like space almost. It is safe space to explore and feel empowered. So it is that knowledge, that craft that you have created, and you're able to now safely, confidently, masterfully play in that space and explore and use it. Death, I do not read as transformation. I do not read it as a positive thing usually. I don't read it as physical death very often, but the word death, I think, has a lot of weight to it. That is ending something. It is severe. It is a scythe to what you're doing. And it's not the explosiveness of the Tower, which we'll talk about, but it comes right before that. Like, I think these cards are so linked in my head. Death is the somberness, the finality of something. It is, the Tower is the new explosive idea that comes out. Death is what happens to the old idea. It is buried. You mourn for it. Death is a really, really heavy card. And there are so many good things that can come out of that, because every card has good and bad, but I definitely read into the somberness of death and the intensity of it. Now, the Tower. This is the most exciting card in the deck for me. Right behind OceanDry, this is the other card that is like foundational to what this deck is. This is the moment when you realize you are not on the bottom of the desert, but you're instead in the ocean. And again, to kind of put this in a more narrative perspective, check out that narrative video. But here, you're connecting things, like all those puzzle pieces that were connecting in judgment that you couldn't quite put together, that you didn't necessarily want to put together, they all click into place. I'll give you a tangible example of this because it's a really weird foo-foo idea. Foo-foo? Whatever. The tower for me with tarot was realizing that it worked and that I didn't understand how it worked. So just this like mind-blowing moment of like, oh my God, you shuffle cards and you draw them and they answer your question perfectly. And nothing about that makes sense to me. My brain fights that daily, but I can't unknow that now. There's this magic that exists within tarot cards that is impossible to unknow. It was this moment of realizing that I know so little about this thing. Like, I was literally standing outside one day looking up at the sky, and there were all these ripples of clouds up top, and I could see stars, but there was only a couple of stars. And the actual thought crossed my mind, those are not clouds, those are waves on top of the ocean, and that's not a star, that is a lighthouse above the water. And I panicked and just totally freaked out because I was at the bottom of the ocean and nothing was on top. And it sounds like crazy to say that, but I did have that experience, but I don't currently think we're underwater. But it's that idea of blowing the lid off what you know and just understanding that there is so much more out there, and just allowing yourself to like drown for a second and be completely mesmerized by the explosiveness that is this new idea. So for me, that's what the tower is. Complete obliteration. And sometimes that is supernova beautiful. Sometimes that is, completely implosive black hole dark. Whatever way you want to take it. It's an intense card, so it might go either way. Let's take a look at 16. The world, or world, I suppose. This, again, we have entered officially crazy abstract territory. The world, and from here on out, is, I might have a little bit of world experience, but like these are things that I am theoretically aware of that I don't necessarily think I have practical experience with. We're seeing the world as the ocean for the first time fully. This is the brilliant mind staring out into the black abyss of knowledge and feeling like warm and comforted. It is understanding that you know nothing in the grand scheme, but you know enough to know that you know nothing, and to feel proud of that, and to feel at home in that, and to know that you can now swim in any direction, because knowing this gives you so much more ability to move and bob and ebb and flow and just go and learn. Because when you're like this ignorant fool who doesn't understand, this whole time up until this moment, you've been walking on the desert floor, ignoring miles of water above you, or thousands of feet, or whatever it might be. This is like being able to finally take that first step and see like, holy crap, there is so much that I can know, and it's exciting here. It is, potentially like monumentally overwhelming, but it is just feeling so small and beautiful with so much potential, and just gaining access to all these new tools and axes all of a sudden that you didn't know that you had. Let's take a look at the next one. I'm so excited I can't even say numbers. Temperance. We've finally gotten here. This is, all the way back to the beginning from the Lovers. We've now gotten to Temperance. And here in our story, we are rising up out of the water, but we're remembering the moment when we fell into the water. Because, you're learning and you're growing, and it's very difficult to think back when you are learning, because at every stage we are who we are. So, like if I tell you, close your eyes and imagine yourself as a 3-year-old. You are superimposing so much of your current self onto your 3-year-old self. It is like nearly impossible to take your mind back, because you can't. You've passed these thresholds that you can't unsee, you can't undo. But you can still remember that journey, that learning, that vulnerability, that anxiety, all these things. And this is so much about the appreciation and the seeing of that, and seeing how it is all one. that is still part of you. That learning and that growing and all of the knowledge is still part of you too. These things that seem so separate and disparate in the lovers are now one, and they are so different. There is this monumental, why did I say it like that? This monumental gap in between those two things. We've gone from the desert to the ocean. We've worked, we've toiled, we've broken our minds open. But at the end of the day, all of it is still us. And in this particular narrative, it has been our higher self bringing us forward the whole time. So it's always been there. This is the most esoteric woo-woo thought that I personally have. But it's the idea that when we learn, it is our higher self guiding us along the way. It is teaching us and moving us. So it is a part of ourself that makes us learn. Like, if you think about it, learning is wild, that we can read something, hear something, understand something, and then remember it. That's crazy. Like, what's happening in the brain? It's so weird and cool. And I don't exactly know how this would work, but in my very magical worldview, that is the higher self imposing that knowledge or allowing us to hold that knowledge or keep it in some way. So it's in many ways us kind of bringing ourselves up to the surface of the water. Let's take a look at 18. The Devil. Now, we've officially kind of entered hypothetical territory. I'm very sleepy, folks. A little behind the scenes knowledge for you here. Now, the Devil is the moment, I assume, when you experience these new axes of learning. And even though you are now confident, awesome, and genius level and masterful, like going in a completely different axis that you couldn't even have imagined before, has got to be terrifying in some way. So this is you exploring that terror and the potential of not wanting to go. Like, the problem is that you've crossed the threshold of the tower and you cannot go back now. There is zero going back, but this is potentially your mind desperately wanting to say, like, no, stick to the desert on the bottom. You know, don't let things go crazy and change like this. But that is a dangerous place to be. There's all these boards sticking up, and it is our higher self saying, like, no, and trying to cut the rope that is tying and holding you down. In our story, our narrative, this is a rope getting tied around your leg as you try to float up. Ooh. Just delightful and all sorts of devilly. Let's take a look at the next one. Number, oh my God, 19? 19. Roman numerals, man. I recently got the Archetypes deck by Kim Kranz. You probably know that if you've seen my channel, because there's like 90 videos of that so far. And the Roman numerals get out of control in that deck. And now I go back to normal ones and I'm like, how do I read XIX again? But here we are. Hanging in our narrative is being in the dead center of the ocean and seeing all of this space around you. And in the learning journey, it's just, I think, being at peace with knowing that you know nothing. Having come all of this way, you know, think back all the way to the beginning of our journey. When we opened the book for the first time with the sun, we literally knew nothing then. And then hanging is the moment where you realize you know exactly the same amount. In the grand scheme of what knowledge is, you know nothing. And it's so humbling of an experience. Hanging is such a humbling card for me. And I've realized, I think I've abandoned ship talking about how I read these cards because they get so expansive. Like, these are literally things that I have not experienced myself. So it is difficult to try and correlate that to something mundane. It's one of the reasons I find reading tarot hard sometimes, because it's like, how do you take all that esotericism and like box it into a reading? And the answer is you do it like Tom Benjamin and you compress it down to mundane stuff because he's so dope. But this one, if I had to say, it would be that idea of just like complete release and knowing that you are just this tiny, insignificant speck in the grand, you know, the grandness of everything, and kind of embracing that quietness and allowing it to sort of wrap you and envelop you. We are almost there, everybody. Let's take a look at 20. This is not 20. Obviously, this is 1, the Emperor, but this is the paired card with the star. If you're not sure what I mean by that, take a look at my visual themes video, and I go through all of these. But here we felt this kind of confidence and understanding, and we saw the sun, but what we didn't realize is that it's actually the moon that's bringing us along. It is our higher self. So this is us feeling fully present in our lower self. The star is us feeling fully present in our higher self. We will move this one right along. This is the surface of the cosmic ocean that we have been swimming up towards. It is the light beyond it. In my experience that one day, this is seeing the star as the lighthouse, but being able to swim up to it, break through the surface, and see its light. This is us finally coming in contact with our higher selves and realizing that it's not something different, it's us. Our higher self has been walking along the desert floor this whole time. It has been swimming with us and journeying with us. We are our higher selves. We just did not have a way to understand that yet. And this is my favorite idea because it's so like mind-bendy that this other thing that has been helping you and leading you and teaching you is you. And it's very confusing and encouraging, and it's all sorts of interesting things wrapped together. Let's just wrap things up real quick with 21, the moon. The moon. This is our higher self. This is us as our higher self. Fully formed, fully realized, fully in control. And the moon helps reveal the sun to the sun. I mean, it's a weird kind of paradoxical thing, but let me grab the sun card here. I've just got this mess of cards on my table, and I'm gonna be real with you. I don't hate that. Where the heck did the sun go? Hello, Mr. Sun. Okay, I'm sorry. This is probably really boring. Here we go. Sun and the moon. So here we see all of this light and experience pouring out. It is us trying to seek the world. It is us trying to understand. But what we don't realize is that ourself, the sun, this pure whiteness, is actually made up of everything. White is all the colors together. We just can't see it because it's too bright. So the moon is seeing all of those colors within us, all of those complexities. And then now it is our job as the moon to lead the sun. We have to lead our lower self to the higher self now that we've gotten there. So it's like this crazy, almost time travel paradox loop of ourself going, up and down, and it's difficult to even talk about because it's a really, really, really abstract idea, and one that many folks might not buy into. Again, this is my personal mythology built into a tarot deck, so if I have lost you at this point, I'm totally cool with that because it just makes me excited that we have different cool things to talk about. The moon is one of my favorite moments in the narrative, in that story, because I kind of go back through and talk about like, okay, this is when the moon talked to the lower self and, added something in or some new information or guided you along. And this is by far the piece that I understand the least, which feels very moon to me. You have to sort of fully uncover and delve into your subconscious. All of these things that are you, but are at the same time not you, that are veiled, are mysterious. Just like the moon pulls the water on earth, our higher self pulls our lower self in ways that we don't understand. And it is that kind of bringing it all together. I hope I didn't go too crazy and abstract at the end there. I probably did, but whatever. It is what it is. That is the narrative of the deck. So let me grab all the cards back here and probably make a bunch of noise doing so. But it's so much like a Lovecraft story in that way, where at the beginning, you have some information and a protagonist who wants to learn, but does not realize the implications of what they're learning. Hopefully that wasn't too loud when I grabbed all these cards. And here we're gonna just take a look at some backs because I just need to right now. I just wanna see some beautiful colors. This has been an absolute blast, guys. I'm dropping cards, I'm like shaking, I don't even know. Hopefully this has been illuminating for you guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. I'm sure this could have probably been presented in a slightly different way, but whatever, this is the way I got. And I'm more than happy to continue to discuss and talk about things and join you on this journey of the Major Arcana as we all learn together and discover and uncover and go from the sun to the moon and, allow our inner moons to help our outer suns all the way as we go. Boy, I feel like I'm just talking in circles, but it just makes me so happy. And just as a reminder, I will put our thesis right back on top. It is our higher self leading our lower self and trying to make them understand that what we know is not the desert, it's the ocean. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. Bye-bye.